Hi everyone. I hope the mic is working so that I have to use the mic just so that the people on the Zoom live stream can hear me. Let me see. Just mute. So thank you all so much for joining us on this Wednesday afternoon. I know we have some guests also from outside NYU who've made the journey here, so I'm very glad to see continued interest in the Premodern Islamicate World Lecture Series. My name is Faris, by the way, just by way of introduction. I'm a third-year PhD student at NYU. And before I begin, I'd just like to thank once again the Kevorkian Center for letting us use the space, MEIS as well, our administrators, Fidel, Amanda, Chloe, and Kieran, and of course the student workers on duty for making this event possible. So for today, the format, as usual, will be we'll have our guest do a presentation for about 45, 50 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A for about 15 minutes after that. And for those who are joining us online, you can type your questions at any time during the talk and we will bring them up in the discussion later on. So I'd first like to introduce our speakers for today. We have Dr. Fouad Ben Ahmed, who is currently the Shawwaf Visiting Professor at the Institute for Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations at Harvard University. Since 2009, he has been Professor of Philosophy and Research Methods at the prestigious Dar al-Hadith al-Hassaniya in Rabat, Morocco, which is affiliated with Al-Qarawiyyin University. Dr. Ben Ahmed's research interests center on the history of philosophy and rational sciences in Islam, particularly from the time of al-Ghazālī to the post-Ibn Rushd period. He's published extensively in Arabic and English, editing texts on philosophy, logic, and medicine. And his notable works include Ibn Tumlus's Compendium on Logic and co-authoring the entry on Ibn Rushd for the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy with Robert Pasnow. And today he is here to tell us about the controversial legal opinions of an 11th century Muslim jurist, Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ, which condemned the use of philosophy and logic in Islamic legal reasoning. So I'll hand over the time to Dr. Fouad. Please.
Thank you. Thank you for this kind invitation. I had prepared an introduction suitable for the proposed title of the paper, but when Faris okay. So I had prepared an introduction suitable for the proposed for the proposed title of the paper, but take place during lunchtime, I decided to revise it, lest I spoil your appetite. Instead, I opted for an introduction that I hope it's more serious, but above all, more appetizing for discussion. Thank you, Faris, for everything. At the outset of his treatise, صون المنطق والكلام عن فني المنطق والكلام, the Shafi'i Ash'ari jurist and hadith scholar Jalal ad-Din al-Suyuti died in 911, observes that later legal theorists up to the end of 9th Islamic century grew preoccupied with logic, philosophy, and kalam. In his view, this trend overshadowed fields such as tafsir, hadith, fiqh. To illustrate, began to eclipse other disciplines, he relates a story about the philosopher and the counselor Nasir ad-Din al-Tusi, who allegedly founded 3 institutes in Baghdad, quote unquote, one each for philosophy, medicine, and hadith, prophetic tradition, while granting while granting their scholars unequal stipends. Philosophers reportedly received 3 dirhams per day, physicians 2, and hadith scholars only half a dirham, like philosophers today. Such disparities fueled feelings of injustice among jurists and hadith experts. and emboldened the sense of superiority among scholars who study rational sciences. As-Suyuti wrote Sawn al-Mantiq against a backdrop of intense rivalry between Usuli scholars who embraced logic and more traditional jurists who opposed it. He had been challenged, possibly by As-Sakhawi, his enemy, to prove his qualifications as a mujtahid, the rank of mujtahid, after being accused of lacking a key prerequisite for ijtihad, proficiency of logic. In response, he decided to undermine the growing authority of logic itself. The technology of nowadays, of that time, sorry. He composed a treatise prohibiting its study, defending what he called the correctness of Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's responsum or fatwa. That responsum stemmed from the Shafi'i Ash'ari jurist and hadith scholar Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ al-Shahrazuri, died in 643, who had argued that logic was not permitted by the lawgiver, nor had it even been practiced by the companions, the Sahaba, the successors, the great imams of Ijtihad, or the pious predecessors. As-Suyuti's revival of Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's fatwa thus brought a centuries-old ruling back into currency. Over time, this fatwa was frequently cited in anti-logic discourse and even reappropriated by some Orientalists who claim a blanket Muslim aversion to the rational sciences. Yet, a closer look reveals that such rulings were part of an internal contest, at least initially, within the Shafi'i school itself, between jurists who employed logic in usul al-fiqh and those who rejected it. Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's responsa were aimed not so much as at philosophers per se, as at al-Shafi'i's usuli, chiefly Abu Hamid al-Ghazālī and Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's contemporary Sayf al-Din al-Amidi, whose later methodology integrated kalam and logic into deriving legal rulings, al-ahkam al-fiqhiyya or al-shar'iyya. In essence, this responsa represented a contest for control of Syrian madrasas in the early 7th century, Islamic century. Although Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's responsa reappeared in various times and places, it is unclear whether they ever achieved their ostensible goal of deterring Usuli scholars from studying logic. Ignace Goldseher claimed in the early 20th century that the fatwa made logic forbidden for properly believing Muslims. Wow. More recently, Talal al-Adim has argued that by issuing this fatwa and dismissing al-Amidi, its proponent hoped both to curb the Aziziyya model, Aziziyya Madrasa in Damascus, model of teaching logic and to deter other scholars from adopting logical methods in usul al-fiqh. But the repeated revivals of the ban, such as As-Suyuti's own effort, hint that it never decisively halted the integration of logic into juristic thought. In fact, logic ultimately came to be seen as essential for achieving the rank of ijtihad. To clarify this development, this study concentrates on three main points. First, the scholarly trajectory of Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ. Second, the specific content in the aims of his fatwas. And finally, their enduring impact in how effectively, if at all, they fulfilled his original intentions. So what about Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's intellectual trajectory? Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ was a Shafi'i, Ash'ari jurist, not a Hanbalite, Ash'ari Shafi'i jurist and traditionalist whose career bridged fiqh and hadith, both. His major works include Adab al-Mufti wal-Mustafti, Sharh Mushkil al-Wasit by Abu Hamid al-Ghazālī, Tabaqat al-Fuqaha al-Shafi'iyya, a very interesting text, and Fatāwā, yet his enduring renown stems from Ma'rifat Anwā' Ilm al-Hadith, widely known as Muqaddimat Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ. His intellectual journey unfolded in two phases. The first culminated in his move to Khurasan and can be termed his initial fiqh-centered phase. Under his father, al-Ṣalāḥ, he received foundational training before relocating to Mosul, where he studied under Imad al-Din ibn Yunus al-Mawsili, a leading Shafi'i jurist. Under his tutelage, Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ mastered the core text of the school, of the Shafi'ite school, particularly the works by Abu Hamid al-Ghazālī, including al-Wajiz and al-Wasit. It is likely that he also encountered al-Mustasfa min ilm al-usul, in which al-Ghazālī advocated logic as an essential tool for scholarly certainty and relevance. This exposure was accompanied by the opposing stance of his master al-Imad, a position that Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ would later use against al-Ghazālī himself. Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's early proficiency in fiqh earned him an assistant teaching position under Imad al-Din ibn Yunus in Mosul. Although Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ was aware of his teacher Imad al-Din ibn Yunus' stance rejecting the integration of logic into legal theory, his biographers also recount a notable yet ultimately abundant attempt to study Aristotelian logic under Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus, Imad al-Din's younger brother and the proponent of post-Fakhr al-Din al-Razi's Kalam. Seeking private instruction, sirran. Seeking private instruction, Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ was warned about the potential impact of logic on his career. Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus reportedly advised him, "People assume you uphold virtue, but those who engage in this discipline are suspected of doctrinal corruption. Thus, you risk damaging your reputation without attaining true mastery of logic." Taking this counsel to heart, Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ ultimately abandoned the pursuit. His trajectory shifted decisively upon his move to Khurasan following Imad al-Din's death. Realizing the uncertainties of a career in fiqh, he pivoted towards hadith. Although he may have encountered basic hadith training under Ubaydullah ibn Samin in his youth, his deep immersion in the discipline occurred in Khurasan, where he ultimately attained expertise in hadith, as reported. Later, Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ moved to the Levant, Sham, which was under Ayyubid control, but this period of his career was marked by instability. He took on teaching roles at multiple institutions and was forced to change schools repeatedly for an extended period. He taught at the Asadiyya Madrasa in Aleppo, the Salahiyya in Jerusalem, and the Nasiriyya and Rawahiyya in Damascus, before securing a prestigious position as the chief instructor at the Dar al-Hadith al-Ashrafiyya in Damascus in 630. His tenure before the Ashrafiyya remains unclear. It appears that he was not teaching hadith, but had turned to his legal studies, which he had begun in Mosul, continuing to teach fiqh as evident from his legal writings in Fatāwā. During this time, he also served as the Imam of the Mu'addam Isa, the ruler of Damascus in that time, earning the title of Imam al-Sultan. Okay. Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's ascension to Dar al-Hadith al-Ashrafiyya marked his definitive turn towards hadith scholarship. Over 13 years, he solidified his authority in the field, attracting students and composing Ma'rifat Anwa' Ilm al-Hadith, which he completed there in 634, around that time. His early engagement with logic contrasted sharply with his later opposition. While open to this discipline during his Mosul years, his time in the Levant, particularly before his Ashrafiyya tenure, saw intense disputes with usul scholars who integrated logic and kalam into legal theory. His Fatāwā reflects this struggle, marking a critical phase of his career. Now, what about Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's Fatāwā? Only one of Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's Fatāwā is widely recognized for prohibiting logic, appearing as Fatwa number 55 in the two known printing editions. overshadowing two additional rulings, number 51 and 54, that are no less significant. I mean, the fatwa number 55 is so known among like some trends of contemporary Arab thought nowadays. I mean, some modernists, when, clarifying the position of Islam towards philosophy, they just mention, oh, we have the position of Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ. And it was so controversial. I mean, in Morocco recently, because they included a part of it in like a handbook of Islamic education. So it was introduced as the formal position of Islam towards philosophy, while it was not the case at all. Anyway, three observations clarify the broader context and style of this fatwa. Uncertain dates, the exact dates of this responsa, remain unknown, as does the date of the fatwa collection's publication. However, it is certain that at least a decade or two separates their issuance from Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's earlier intent to study logic under Kamal ad-Din ibn Yunus. Since issuing fatwa was the domain of jurists rather than traditionalists, it is unlikely that Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ composed his anti-logic responsa after assuming his post as Dar al-Hadith al-Ashrafiyya. More likely, these rulings date to his itinerant teachings year, when he focused on traditional fiqh instruction. What about their style and authorship? Although each fatwa bears its own heading, the specific occasion of or addressee is not entirely clear. It is uncertain whether the question, istifta, came from a student of Islamic studies, from the ruling sultan, or if the questions were framed by Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ himself, complete with their responses. It was like mas'ala, theoretical mas'ala. At least one of these rulings, however, is explicitly directed to the sultan. The Ashraf Musa Sultan. The result is a seemingly artificial quality, though the content reflects real concerns and controversies. The fatwa may have been formatted in a question and answer style that reverses the usual process. Historical insight. Despite their somewhat contrived form, these fatwa offer a glimpse into the intellectual milieu in which Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ operated. Fatwa number 54 shows that Ibn Sina's writings were widely circulated and that scholars in fiqh, hadith, and Sufism read them. It also reveals that many of these scholars considered Ibn Sina a religious Islamic scholar. I mean, he described him as being shaitan. A perception reflecting ongoing debates about the religious features of Ibn Salah's works. Ibn Sina's works. Fatwa number 51 indicate that works of usul al-fiqh incorporating kalam and logic had become popular. Many authors in usul were philosophers, or at least philosophically inclined, and had composed either abridgment or commentaries on Ibn Sina's writings. Al-Amidi commented Ibn Sina, al-Ghazālī also Maqasid al-Falasifa, and other, not mention al-Razi, with no need to mention his writings. Their rhetorical skill proved appealing to students, making philosophy seem pleasant, according to Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ. Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ mentions a contemporary prodigy, النابغ, مثل النابغ في عصرنا. It's in Fatwa 51. كما وقع في كلام هذا النابغ في عصرنا. I mean, fourth line of the Fatwa 51. Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ, in this domain whose usul treatises guided students toward philosophy. Fatwa number 55 notes that students of Islamic disciplines increasingly turn to logic for both teaching and learning, integrated logical terminology into legal derivations. and believed logic essential to establishing Islamic legal rulings. It alludes to the dominance of usul scholars with logical and philosophical inclination in the Levantine madrasas and highlight the Sultan's direct responsibility over these institutions. Taken together, this fatwa reflects Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's broader conflict with students who embraced the post-classical synthesis of logic, kalam, and usul al-fiqh. Fatwa number 51 and 55 in particular seem deliberately crafted to ban the works of a specific adversary in usul al-fiqh and provide the Sultan with a religious pretext for his dismissal. In fatwa number 55, Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ refers to an individual from among the people of philosophy known for teaching it, instructing others in it, and writing on it. It is obligatory upon the Sultan of our land or of our country to dismiss him, expel him from the madrasa, imprison him, and confine him to his home. Similarly, in fatwa number 51, he warns against a prodigy, Nabigh, whose approach to usul leads students towards philosophy. Ultimately, the sweeping condemnation of logical terminology in deriving legal rulings, calling them among the repugnant and detestable innovations, and deriding them as a mere cluttering noises, suggests that Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ was countering a specific group of logician theorists. Such language underscores how fiercely he opposed the blending rational methods with legal reasoning, a stance that illuminates the intense scholarly rivalries of his day. So, who were these figures? On the intent targets of Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's fatwas, analysis of Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's fatwas reveals they were not directed against philosophers. They were not against philosophers, nor against students of philosophy, as some assume today, but rather warned students of religious disciplines against later Shafi'i usul scholars and Ash'ari theologians influenced by Ibn Sina. Fatawa number 51 and 55 particularly target Abu Hamid al-Ghazālī and Sayfuddin al-Amidi, aiming to invalidate al-Ghazālī's call to integrate logic into usul al-fiqh and to curb al-Amidi's broader synthesis of legal theory, speculative theology, and logic. So let's have a look at Abu Hamid al-Ghazālī's position concerning logic and why, Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ was against this call. In Fatwa 51, Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ seems to address the permissibility of purely Fatwa number 1. Fatwa number 54. 51, yes. Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ seems to address the permissibility of purely usul al-fiqh works, those free of logic and kalam. The question itself appears unnecessary since such works were already accepted. So why asking some it's obvious, goes without saying, it's free of logic. Why asking this question? The real concern then is the ruling on usul al-fiqh texts that mix logic and kalam with legal theory, not the opposite. These blended works, not the purely legal ones, are the target of his condemnation. Al-Ghazālī's usul writings likely fall under this critique. Like Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ, al-Ghazālī was a Shafi'i, Ash'ari scholar or jurist. But he firmly upheld that logic is the key to all sciences. Al-Ghazālī defended in several writings, there's no enough space to talk about his position, that logic is a neutral introductory tool with no connection to the rejected metaphysical content. He states, an example, as for logic, Al-Ghazālī's words in Al-Munqidh, as for logic, none of its aspects pertain to religion, whether in affirmation or negation. Rather, it concerns the examination of methods of proof and syllogisms, the conditions of premises in demonstration, their composition, the requirements of a proper definition, had, and how it is structured. ومما يتألف knowledge of either conceptualization تصور which is attained through definition through حد, or assent تصديق which is attained through demonstration برهان. There is nothing in this that should be rejected, his words. However, this is precisely what Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ unequivocally rejected, as we shall see. Ibn Taymiyyah, a prominent critic of al-Ghazālī's approach, accuses him of adopting methods from Ibn Sina, who in turn had borrowed them from Aristotle. Ibn Taymiyyah also highlights that al-Ghazālī's influence encouraged later scholars to incorporate logic into usul al-fiqh. From the 6th, 12th century onward, technical logic in its terminology, such as burhan, had, tasawwur, tasdiq, others, became prevalent in juristic writings, eventually marking a defining feature of scholarship of the Shafi'i disciplines. Ironically, Muslims, particularly the Ash'ari scholars, who had long opposed logic and logicians, eventually came to view mastery of Aristotelian logic as a prerequisite for achieving the status of ijtihad. This shift was especially evident within the Shafi'i school, where scholars like Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, Saif al-Din al-Amidi integrated logic with kalam and usul al-fiqh, embedding it into the curricula of madrasa. Something new. This development had significant consequences for the competition over teaching position within these institutions. Many scholars before Ibn Taymiyyah showed worries of this expansion, sought to maintain traditional approaches and keep the study of the religious sciences insulated from these new instructors, whose growing influence was bolstered by the appeal and the intellectual rigor of their methodological innovations, qualities often absent in traditional writings. In response, later scholars who strongly opposed logic frequently cited Shafi'i's rejection of both logic and kalam, aiming to remind contemporary Shafi'i theorists of his original stance. You are a Shafi'ite scholar, so you have to know about the position of our Shaykh. He was against logic and kalam. Notably, Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's fatwa in the early 7th century explicitly called for a return to the authority of the Salaf. That's why he mainly introduced it as a Salafi, who he argued had mastered fiqh without resorting to the logical methods and terminology championed by al-Ghazālī, al-Razi, and al-Amidi and others. So what was the reaction of Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ against al-Ghazālī? I guess Manda missed the print of the rest of my paper. No, it's okay. It's okay. I have it here. Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, you're good on time.
Yeah, it's okay. Good. Logic. Although multiple indications suggest that Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ intended his fatwa to target al-Ghazālī, he does not name him in any of them. We will not find, al-Ghazālī, mentioned here. He does not name him in any of them. He mentions him, however, in another text of equal significance, the entry devoted to al-Ghazālī in his Tabaqat Fuqaha al-Shafi'iyya, the biographical layers of the Shafi'i jurists. You know the function of such writings, which survive in a version edited by Yahya ibn Sharaf al-Nawawi, another opponent of logic who notoriously permitted its text to be used for ritual cleansing. Reading Fatwas number 51 and 55, in light of that section, clarified that al-Ghazali's works are at least in part among those at issue. Like other legal and theological schools, the Shafi'is produced works on successive generation of their scholars, tabaqat. I mean, the Hanabila have their tabaqat, the Shafi'iyya have their tabaqat, the Mu'tazila have their tabaqat, and it was just like, not like for, for educational reasons, but for, to exclude some if they are not part of the mainstream of thought. Like other legal, the Shafi'is produced works on successive generations of their schools. These writings often served not only to list major figures, but also to critique or to exclude certain individuals. طبقات الفقهاء الشافعية by Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ fits that pattern. Sizable Shafi'i figures are overlooked, including Saif al-Din al-Amidi, of course. More striking is the ambivalent treatment of Abu Hamid al-Ghazālī in this tabaqat. One of the foremost Shafi'i authorities, Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ, entry on him spanning 15 pages, which is remarkable, is less an objective survey than a sustained critique. Apart from a single citation of the Maliki jurist al-Mazari, the text is almost entirely devoted to enumerating al-Ghazali's so-called oddities, shududat, with only a few lines dedicated to his biography. Not few lines, few words. One line, 5 words. With only a few lines dedicated to his biography. Instead, the introduction highlights his strange positions in jurisprudence, followed by a 14-page chapter titled A Section Detailing Important Matters Denounced in al-Imam al-Ghazali's writings, which neither the adherent of his own school nor others approved. Now okay. This one here. Approved. Okay. Of namely his singular and aberrant positions in various areas. For most among the centuries. Sorry. Now I'm struggling with this. For most among the censured views is al-Ghazali's statement on logic in the introduction to the Mustasfa. He quoted this. This is the introduction to all the sciences, and whoever does not master it cannot be trusted in any of his knowledge. Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ saw this claim as particularly dangerous. He mentioned this. Given al-Ghazali's stature as Hujjat al-Islam in the leading Shafi'i authority in law and legal theory, to counter this assertion, Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ cites Yusuf al-Dimashqi, a teacher at the Nizamiyya in Baghdad, another authority, who refuted al-Ghazali's view by appealing to the example of early Muslim figures, who Abu Bakr, Umar, and others, who attained supreme certainty without any exposure to logic. Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ further approaches al-Ghazali for deviating from the tradition of early Ash'ari Shafi'i masters, particularly his own teacher, Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, none of whom, he insists, Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ, relied on logic in their legal methodology. Toward the end of the entry, he makes explicit his primary objection to al-Ghazali, the integration of logic into usul al-fiqh, which he condemns as innovation of dire consequence for jurists, as it steered them toward philosophical methods. In Fatwa number 51, Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ similarly condemns usul texts that weave logic into legal theory, even though they deal with usul al-fiqh. He pronounced them forbidden or reprehensible for introducing an illicit innovation, bid'ah or mustahdatha. Al-Ghazali's statement that logic is a neutral instrument devoid of any philosophy is, in Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's view, unsound. Now we come to the meaning of Ibn Salah's logic. It is the gateway to philosophy, and the gateway to evil is itself evil. So this sentence, وأما المنطق, sorry to highlight this, وأما المنطق فهو مدخل الفلسفة ومدخل الشر شر, it was against al-Ghazālī, not against Ibn Sina, not against Ibn Rushd, not against al-Farabi, not against, not Ibn Rushd at least. Ibn Rushd came after. He likewise calls applying logical terms such as definition and demonstration to legal rulings amongst the reprehensible wrongdoings, munkarat, and the newly invented absurdities, ومن المستحدثات المستبشعة, that scripture does not require. They are mere noise, in his words. Thus, Ibn Salah's fatwas in his tabaqat entry converge in asserting that the Shari'i disciplines should remain independent of logic. A consistent theme throughout is the claim that integrating Aristotelian logic into usul al-fiqh threatens traditional legal scholarship by exposing it to philosophical perspective that diverge from the established school. Now, what about Ibn Salah's and al-Amidi? Ibn Salah's censor of al-Ghazālī in fatwa number 51 and 55, as well as in Tabaqat al-Fuqaha al-Shafi'iyya, reflect his concern that al-Ghazālī's integration of logic into legal theory was still exerting widespread influence. Yet, Ibn Salah's criticisms also target contemporaries who continued to merge logic and usul al-fiqh. Although this fatwas does not name these figures explicitly, they consistently refer to someone teaching falsafa and logic in a religious madrasa in his time, thereby implying that scholars like Sayfuddin al-Amidi were prime target. Ibn Salah's fatwa number 55 demonstrates the effort to contain what he considered an illicit mingling of logic, kalam, and legal theory. It refers to someone known for teaching falsafa in a madrasa, I'm quoting, writing works on it, and openly practicing it, and urges the Sultan to remove and punish such an individual. You can read the end of the fatwa. The text specifies two levels of actions: a general obligation, wajib am, to punish or even to execute anyone holding the doctrines of the philosophers if they refuse to repent, and the more urgent command, awjab wal wajib, to dismiss a teacher of logic or falsafa from his post, imprison him, or confine him. This depiction closely matches al-Amidi's circumstances. He didn't mention al-Amidi. He combined a Shafi'i legal expertise with advanced training in kalam, logic, and philosophical legacy of Ibn Sina. He rose to prominence by teaching at al-Aziziyya madrasa in Damascus, and his works, especially al-Ihkam fi usul al-Ahkam, blended logic, philosophy, and usul. Historical sources mention that al-Mu'addam Isa ruled, between 615 to 624, was the one who appointed al-Amidi to his position at the Aziziyya madrasa, where he remained for approximately 15 years until he was dismissed by al-Ashraf Musa. The Sultan of Damascus ruled from 626 to 626 to 635, effectively bringing in his prolific scholarly career to an end. Ibn Taymiyyah explicitly connects Ibn Salah's fatwa to al-Amidi, stating, among the well-known reports we received is that Sheikh Abu Amr ibn Salah ordered a certain madrasa to be taken from Abu al-Hasan al-Amidi, saying, striping it from him is better than capturing Akka. وأخذها من الآمدي خير من استرجاع عكا. Although the extant text of Ibn Salah's Ibn Taymiyyah's testimony suggests that the original or an alternate version of the fatwa number 55 explicitly targeted him. regardless the legal ruling closely aligns with al-Amidi's profile, a scholar engaged in logic, falsafa, and the teaching of usul al-fiqh in the madrasa, precisely the combination of that alarmed Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ. Beneath this controversy lie a deeper intellectual and personal rivalry. On one hand, al-Amidi was associated with this, what we call طريقة المتأخرين in usul al-din, in usul al-fiqh, which systematically employed Aristotelian logic to derive and justify legal rulings. In contrast, Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ championed the approach of the earlier scholars. No logic, but mainly, jurists should use more hadith, who resisted integrating Shafi'i legal theory with logic. In short, he was a Salafite. On the other hand, al-Amidi's prominence as a lecturer at the Aziziyya Madrasa in Damascus underscored the dominance of the later tradition, the Mutaakhirun, while Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ spent years moving from one institution to another without a permanent position. It was only after the Amidi's dismissal that the Sultan Ashraf Musa appointed him as head of the newly established Dar al-Hadith al-Ashrafiyya in 630. It is likely that al-Amidi's influence in success, alongside what some historians interpret as a personal animosity, compelled Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ to issue this fatwa as a means of eliminating his rival. In reality, these three fatwas reflect the deep anxiety felt by the faction represented by Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ in response to al-Amidi's growing dominance and increasing influence of the latter school across the madrasas of Damascus. Not only Damascus, Egypt, and the rest of the Muslim world. The response remained rather a protest cry against this widespread adoption of the later method, طريقة المتأخرين, and the persistent popularity of al-Ghazālī's, al-Razi's, and al-Amidi's logical framework in the madrasa system. It is particularly striking to note that the responsa were issued by a Shafi'i Ash'ari against another Shafi'i Ash'ari, rather than against a philosopher in the insist or a logician in the traditional sense of the terms. Now, what about the impact of Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's responsa, the last part of my presentation? Given al-Amidi's removal from his position and its coincidence with Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's appointment as head of Dar al-Hadith al-Ashrafiyya, one might ask, was Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's stance truly this personal? Were all these fatwas, the questions, answers, and justifications he formulated directed solely at al-Amidi? And did this fatwa have any impact beyond what happened to al-Amidi? The immediate impact on al-Amidi himself is clear. Dismissed. He was removed and confined to his home until his death for at least 2 years. Beyond that, the fatwa does not appear to have halted the advance of logic-based approaches to usul. In fact, the fatwa's influence on its own era seems slight in view of the large number of scholars who continued to integrate logic into legal and theological studies. Again, Ignace Goldziher depicts Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's hostility towards Aristotelian logic as typical of broad Sunni opposition in the early 7th, 13th century, arguing that the recognition of the Aristotelian methods of demonstration was seen as a serious threat to correct faith. He cites al-Amidi experience, his expulsion and disgrace in Egypt and Syria, as proof of how deeply this aversion penetrated Sunni circles around the Muslim world. He said this. It was serious. However, it is difficult to establish that rejection of logic was truly the prevailing view at that time. In fact, many theorists, usulis, and theologians embraced the latter method, طريقة المتأخرون, which systematically integrated logic and the philosophical tradition of Ibn Sina into usul al-fiqh and usul al-din. A notable irony is that al-Amidi's dismissal came around 630, a time when interest in logic was at its zenith. due to the efforts of his own students, those of Fakhr al-Din al-Razi and Afdal al-Din al-Khunaji. While Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ attacked al-Amidi, al-Khunaji, also another Shafi'ite scholar, was completing groundbreaking logical works such as Kashf al-Asrar an Ghawamid al-Afkar and his masterpiece al-Jumal. These works became influential in Egypt, not only in Egypt, around the Muslim world, North Africa, especially among scholars of usul. Furthermore, despite Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's denunciations, the Ghazalian trend of beginning works of usul, on usul with a logical introduction gained new vigor. Let me mention some names. An outstanding example is the Maliki Ash'ari Abu Amr Uthman ibn al-Hajib, who's widely acclaimed مختصر منتهى السول والأمل في علمي الأصول والجدل opens with an extensive logical prolegomena and a discussion of kalam in conscious imitation of Ghazali's approach. This text is in fact an abridgment of Al-Amidi's Al-Ihkam fi Usul al-Ahkam and became a foundational handbook for generation of Shafi'i and Maliki legal theorists. Since Ibn Salah's time. Other figures followed a similar pattern. The Hanbali, Ibn Qudam al-Maqdisi, who was against theology, he adopted al-Ghazali's approach, introducing his text with a long, introduction on logic. More, Shihab al-Din al-Qarafi, an Ash'arite Maliki who studied under al-Khunaji, Shams al-Din al-Khusrashahi, and Izz al-Din ibn Abd al-Salam, used al-Ghazali's approach exhaustively that he called for logic as condition of ijtihad. He was the first one explicitly expressed this idea that if you want to, to attain the strength of mujtahid, you have to study logic. No logic, your CV is, Yahya ibn Musa al-Rahuni. I'm interested in this man. I have to share with you a short quotation, but Shihab al-Din al-Qarafi said, it is required to know the conditions of definition, had, and demonstration, burhan, outright. Why? Because when dealing with what's the nature of adilla shar'iyya, it's the nature of religious proofs, or we need to know about what's the nature of assent, which is the nature of conceptualization, tasawwur and tasdiq. Thus, we need logic. These conditions are known only from the discipline of logic. So there's no way to deal with this without logic. Yahya ibn Musa al-Rahuni, a student of Ibn al-Hajib and al-Abili, a Tunisian scholar, produced the commentary on Ibn al-Hajib's Mukhtasar, titled تحفة المسؤول في شرح مختصر منتهى السول, prefacing it with a thorough theological and logical discussion in the same vein of the later school. Similar examples surface in different madhabs and regions. Thus, far from stifling the Ghazalian legacy, Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's protests coincided with an even more vibrant proliferation of logic in usul studies. One could go on at length listing the names of usuli scholars who followed the methodology of al-Ghazālī or al-Amidi, or who combined elements of both. Initially, this list was limited to Shafi'i usuli. But over time, it expanded to include scholars from most legal schools, encompassing Malikis, Hanbalis, and even Hanafi schools, who were totally against, albeit to varying degrees. In this development, Shafi'i and Maliki usuli came to dominate the list, while the Hanafis, who had long resisted this trend, eventually saw some of their later usulis, or at least a portion of them, adopted. Later on, however, Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's stance, alongside those of al-Nawawi, Ibn Taymiyyah, and al-Suyuti, has often been invoked, both by supporters of and by its critiques. From the 10th century onward, later logicians were compelled to address it once the Algerian logician Abd al-Rahman al-Akhdari included Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's in the Nawawi's prohibitions in his versified logic handbook, As-Sullam al-Murawnak. Commentators on As-Sullam returned to the question of the legal status of logic. Earlier logic texts rarely mentioned the fatwa, but al-Akhdari, writing for beginners, that was the reason why he mentioned it was written for beginners, so deemed it necessary to discuss whether logic is permissible. His commentators, however, typically sided with al-Ghazālī's position rather than that of Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ, presenting the latter as unsupported in light of al-Ghazālī al-Razi argument. Paradoxically, they started their commentaries with the position of an-Nawawi in Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ, and then the position of al-Razi in al-Ghazālī, not the opposite. Does this not suffice as evidence that Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's fatwa has little to no impact whether on usulis or on logicians? Yet, this question itself may be of limited significance if Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ did not, in fact, hold a definitive and hostile stance against logic. Rather, his position may have acquired such as a character only through its later revival, primarily by his students and more recently by certain currents in contemporary Arab thought. A closer examination of Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's intellectual development suggests that his position on logic was not one of absolute rejection, but rather one shaped by specific circumstances. While he did at certain points oppose logic and issue rulings against it, of course, against its studies, there is no evidence that he criticized his teacher, his first teacher of logic, Kamal ad-Din ibn Yunus, a scholar renowned for his contributions to philosophy, logic, and theology, was one of the brilliant scholars of that time. More than that, or objected to Ibn Qudama, his contemporary, a friend, who followed the al-Ghazālī's tradition. On the contrary, he spoke of both of them, of both figures, in a highly positive terms, as outstanding scholars. Additionally, none of Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's known works indicate that he later on disavowed his early engagement with logic, nor do they suggest a definitive rupture from the intellectual background. His fatwas, therefore, do not simply reflect opposition to others, but may also signal a shift in his own position over time, shaped not only by doctrinal concerns, but also by broader intellectual and institutional dynamics. Given the strong correlation between his rulings and his encounters with al-Amidi, it is reasonable to consider that specific fatwa, particularly number 51 and 55, were influenced by personal and scholarly disputes. In this light, the extreme fatwa regarding the permissibility of using books of logic for personal cleansing must be seen within the context of these tensions. The ruling that logic books might serve only for istinja, once any sacred references has been removed, likely functioned as a barbed gesture intended to provoke adherent of logical tradition. It reinforced the view that logic, in contrast to traditional Shari'i disciplines, lacked intellectual and spiritual worth. And Nawawi and others, followed Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ, went so far as to present such works as fit only to be discarded. An outlook that stood in stark opposition to al-Ghazālī's vision of logic as the tool for safeguarding the mind from error and purifying the soul. Al-Ghazālī's introduced logic as the key of happiness, not only in this, not only during your life, but in the afterlife. I have a text. Returning to as-Suyūṭī in his revival of Ibn Salah's fatwa mentioned at the outset of this presentation, it becomes apparent that as-Suyūṭī's critique of logic as a prerequisite for achieving the rank of ijtihad might give the impression that this was a novel controversy in the 9th century. However, when placed in its proper historical context, his opposition appears to have been, at least in part, driven by personal concerns. Furthermore, the requirement of logic for attaining the status of mujtahid had already been firmly established since the 7th century, with earlier precedents such as al-Razi al-Mankhul, al-Razi's Kitab al-Mankhul. Anyone who's familiar with this text, you might find his, explicit statement concerning the rank of ijtihad. Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's rulings should be understood not as timeless doctrinal declarations, but as responses to the intellectual and institutional tensions of their time, reflecting both immediate polemical concerns and the broader debates over the role of logic in legal reasoning. Conclusion. Ibn al-Ṣalāḥ's fatwas have often been stripped of the conditions in which they were originally issued. This study has sought to demonstrate that these rulings were not abstract pronouncements, but were deeply embedded in Ibn Salah's intellectual trajectory in the competitive scholarly environment of Syria. The divide between Usuli scholars who embraced logic and the jurists who rejected it formed the backdrop against which his fatwas must be understood. Ultimately, the study has shown that these rulings had little lasting impact. Jurists continued to engage with logic, including through the commentary and abridgment of Al-Amidi's Al-Ihkam, the very work that Ibn Salah had sought to challenge. How can John Proctor's declaration in the Crucible, "I have given my soul, leave me my name," be fully understood without considering its historical context, its American context? Likewise, can Ibn Salah's response be properly assessed by drawing comparisons to the church's condemnations of Aristotelian Averroism in 1270 and 1278? The failure to situate such texts within their historical and intellectual milieus leads inevitably to anachronisms. Thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ben Ahmed, for that really erudite and enlightening presentation. And now we have time for questions from the audience, both in person and online. So yes, go ahead.
Thank you. What I can, okay? Yeah. Okay. What I can share with you concerning this is that, except for jurists like Ibn Salah, and they can mention some names, Ibn Salah, Al-Mizzi, Al-Nawawi, and then reappropriated by Ibn Taymiyyah, and then As-Suyuti, you may not find any mention of Ibn Salah's, as being like the right position. Even more, I can mention certain names like Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, known as as a jurist, he said that, okay, he mentioned the position of an-Nawawi concerning using logic text for cleansing. He said, oh, that was the position when logic was mixed with philosophy. It's not the right position anymore. You need logic nowadays. And in that time, Ibn Hajar al-Haytami was referring to like the new model of logical writings, like writings by al-Khunaji and other scholars. But no other, I didn't succeed to find like similar positions of Ibn Salah in like, in Usuli writing. There was no response. As an example, I can mention, a known scholar from Tunisia who recognized the authority of Ibn Salah as a muhaddith, Ibn Araf al-Warqmi, for example. He mentioned, and he quoted Ibn Salah as a muhaddith, but he practiced logic. Just that's feeling. That's the impression. They just ignored it. So, except that for certain circumstances, some scholars like al-Suyuti, as I mentioned, but mainly modern intellectuals, they just reappropriated this. Mainly the Wahhabite. This is why you might find some new fatwa on logic. That's what I can share with you.
I'll take one more question from Zoom. There's just an anonymous question. Yeah. Are there studies on analyzing Ibn Salah's fatwa prohibiting logic and philosophy in English, Spanish, or German? They're very specific.
Studies on analysis. I mentioned two names.
Right.
I mentioned
Goldsir.
I mentioned Goldsir and Talal al-Adam.
Right.
That's I'm familiar. Yeah, that's what I have in
Right.
mind. I mentioned them. That's it.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, Jacob.
Yeah, thank you so much for your outstanding. Question. I'm not a specialist of history of Islamic law. So what I can add to your interesting comment is that yes, Ibn as-Salah defended this kind of instead of mixing logic with usul al-fiqh with logic, we should mix usul al-fiqh with hadith. which reflects his career. That's what he can add. But why I mentioned this conflict between the two methods, the tariqat al-mutaakhir, because we have some testimonies. That's why we have some testimonies concerning al-Rahuni. I have to check. That's what I can tell you. I know that he adopted, the position of Ibn al-Hajib, concerning the integration of logic, but I don't know about the impact of this on his, the core of his legal theory. That's something that I have to look for. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Sorry, for people on Zoom, they would have to use this.
This is a very simple question. Could you tell us more about the handbook on Islamic education that you mentioned in Morocco that uses these fatwa to argue against the teaching of logic?
It's online. Anyway, some years ago, maybe 10 years or something like that, it was like a new handbook dedicated, to use at school for a high school, I guess, high school or less than high school. And then there was like a quotation, like the Islam موقف الفلسفة, the Islam's position towards philosophy. And then they quoted this الفلسفة شر وال الفلسفة رأس السفه والانحلال. I have to read it in English, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Philosophy is the pinnacle of foolishness and moral dissolution, the substance of bewilderment and deviance. Then, as for logic, it is the gateway to philosophy, and the gateway to evil is itself evil. Okay. Then, okay, that's what they use, teachers or instructors of Islamic education, what we call in Morocco Tarbiyya Islamiyya. Used to teach their colleagues of philosophy teachers. They weren't happy about this, so they just started talking about this. Then some petitions, even they signed a petition, addressed it to the king. Oh, let's stop this. This is against philosophy. You are like, the leader of believers, and you have to, anyway, to intervene to stop this. And then this sorry about this. I can repeat it. It's fortunately it's okay. We are talking politics now. So then, like controversy, polemics, took place in Morocco based on this. Based, to some extent, I was part of this, but to a modest extent. My position is that, I used to teach this at Dar al-Hadith al-Hasaniyya for 14 years, to my students. And it wasn't, according to my understanding, our understanding, it wasn't against philosophy. It was against, some usuli and some mutakallim. So more than that, what's the problem? If it's against philosophy, what's the problem? Let's talk. Let's express our position. Maybe it's up to you as a teacher of philosophy to reject this or to refute this. Otherwise, we are not angels. Philosophers are not angels. So it's okay. That's at least my position. And more than that, if you go to, and maybe I forgot exactly the title, if you go to a famous, a text by a famous scholar, Suleiman Bashir Diani, something like that. Suleiman Bashir Diani is really known. Yes, his text, Openness to Reason or something like that. If you read the conclusion, you might find a reference to this as being like, as a modernist, position towards to defend philosophy in this time. According to my understanding, it was like a fake discussion. It's just like, it's not, we have to know about the circumstances of Ibn Salah. It was like, like we are victim of a trap by some approaches, mainly the Wahhabite approach, because they introduced this fatwa as being an abstract fatwa. As they may suggest to this fatwa as being like when reading some definitions or some philosophical text by Hegel or Kant. Circumstances, and that's what I can tell you. Then I can continue talking to you about this after.
It's treated like an ahistorical definition of whether philosophy is permissible.
Nietzsche has a nice statement concerning this. People, they have this tendency to tahnit, to the tahnit, this Egyptian tendency. Egyptian tendency. They make things immortal while they are just
right. Good. Wonderful. Any other questions? Oh, okay. Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you. First, I would like to say thank you for our Professor Fouad for coming us from away to share with us the deep knowledge about his Islamic thought and logic, especially particularly the fatwa of Ibn Salah. So as we know that in the first of medieval time, that's a deep debate, discussion between the, as I can say, the translator of Greek philosophy. Sorry for that, my opinion. So he's a translator of the Greek philosopher and the fuqaha Sunnah, and between Ash'ari and al-Mu'tazila. So in my question in this way, so does the medieval debate over logic still influence temporary Islamic scholarship, and how should the modern scholar assess the balance between tradition and rational inquiry, especially the modern philosophy?
Anyway, this, I cannot deal with this. It's a very interesting question, but I cannot deal with it, as a whole. I can mention that if you go to like a website, a Jordanian website, Majlis al-A'la Dini or something like that, or Majlis al-Ifta al-Urduni, you might find a fatwa on logic. 2014. I was surprised. Except that, don't be surprised. You have to read. When I read the text, when I read the fatwa, it was like Razi's position towards logic. It was like, the position of the later scholars of Kalam. It reflects this influence that logic now is free of philosophy. So it's okay. It's okay. That's what I can mention. But it's, according to my career, it's just part of my scholarship. I know that the aim was just to relativize this. To read this in its historical circumstances. That's it. I know that it's too difficult because the fatwa are so famous, are so popular, but we have to read about them. We have to read. Like, just remember that Ibn Salah tried to study logic. Just ask yourself why he did this. I can tell you why. Like, he was convinced that the only way to succeed his career was to study logic. And Kamal ad-Din ibn Yunus, his teacher of logic, he was convinced that there was no way for this man to study logic. So please, الرأي عندي يا فقيه, that was his words, to stop studying this. You will just corrupt your career as an assistant. So you have to, at least we have to read this in its context. That's what I can tell you, and thank you so much.
Yeah, it's really interesting that this debate that seems to be happening at a very elite level of Islamic, religious scholarship is still invoked for kind of like popular ideas about what is permissible and not permissible in Islamic law. So yeah, that's all the time that we have for today. Join me again in thanking Dr. Ben Ahmed.
Thank you.
And please subscribe to the Kevorkian Center's mailing list and follow the social media to receive updates on future events in the lecture series. On April 17th, there will be a roundtable on Sufism studies here at this same venue. We will have some specialists on Ottoman Sufism in the Ottoman Empire, and one of our speakers will be Dr. Ahmed Kara Mustafa, as you know, who will also be a guest at the Kevorkian Center. Otherwise, thank you all, and have a good rest of your day.